The Great Depression wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a hunger crisis. Picture this, it's 1932, and nearly 1 in 4 Americans is out of work. Bread lines stretch for blocks in every major city. Mothers water down milk to make it last. Fathers skip meals so their children can eat. The land of plenty had become a land of empty stomachs. In the heart of New York City, a woman named Mary Smith, just one of millions, stands in line for hours, clutching a single dime. That dime is all she has to feed her family that day. But where can you buy a meal for 10 cents? Enter the humble penny cafeteria, a lifeline for the desperate. These cafeterias weren't glamorous, fluorescent lights, chipped formica tables, the smell of boiled potatoes and weak coffee, but they were a sanctuary. For just a few pennies, you could get a bowl of soup, a slice of bread, maybe even a scrap of meat if you were lucky. What's astonishing is how these cafeterias operated. Many were run by charities or city governments, but some were private businesses barely scraping by themselves. One cafeteria in Chicago famously served over 5,000 meals a day, each costing just 5 cents. The owner, a German immigrant named Otto, refused to raise prices even when his own suppliers hiked theirs. "If I charge more," he said, "people will starve." And then there were the unspoken rules. No one took more than they needed. If you had an extra penny, you might slip it under your plate for the next person. Strangers shared tables without a word, bound by silent understanding. These cafeterias weren't just places to eat, they were places of dignity in a time when dignity was in short supply. But here's something you might not know, some of these cafeterias had secret menus. If a customer looked especially frail or hadn't eaten in days, the servers would quietly slide them an extra slice of bread or a piece of fruit. No charge. No questions asked. It was survival, yes, but it was also solidarity. This is the story of how America fed itself when the world fell apart. A story of ingenuity, resilience, and the quiet kindness of a nickel meal. The Great Depression left millions of Americans staring into empty cupboards, desperate for a meal they could afford. But from that hunger rose an ingenious solution, the penny cafeteria. These humble eateries weren't just places to eat, they were lifelines, built on the radical idea that no one should go hungry, no matter how little they had. The first penny cafeterias sprang up in cities like New York and Chicago, often run by charities, churches, or even concerned citizens. The concept was simple: walk in, grab a tray, and fill it with hearty, no-frills food, each item costing just a penny. A bowl of soup? 1 cent. A slice of bread? Another penny. A scoop of mashed potatoes? You guessed it, a single copper coin. For a nickel, a person could leave with a full stomach and dignity intact. These cafeterias were starkly different from the diners and luncheonettes of the era. There were no jukeboxes, no chrome counters, no waitresses calling you honey. Instead, long communal tables filled sparse rooms, where factory workers, out-of-work bankers, and hungry kids sat side by side. The menus were bare bones but nourishing: bean stews, creamed vegetables, and cornbread, foods that stretched cheap ingredients into filling meals. One surprising detail? Some cafeterias used color-coded tickets to discreetly identify those who couldn't pay at all, ensuring they still got fed without shame. The penny cafeteria movement spread like wildfire. By the mid-1930s, cities across America had them, often tucked into church basements or repurposed storefronts. They weren't just feeding people, they were fostering community. Strangers shared stories over steaming bowls, and volunteers, many of them former patrons, paid it forward by scrubbing pots or peeling potatoes. In a time of despair, these cafeterias became unexpected beacons of hope. And then, as quickly as they appeared, they began to fade. The post-war boom brought prosperity, and the idea of eating for pennies seemed like a relic of harder times. But for those who lived through the Depression, the memory of those crowded, warm rooms lingered, a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the simple power of a shared meal. Walking into a penny cafeteria during the 1930s was like stepping into a well-oiled machine of practicality and warmth. These establishments were designed with one goal in mind: to feed as many people as quickly and affordably as possible. The layout was simple yet ingenious. Customers entered through a single door, immediately greeted by a long counter lined with steaming trays of food. Everything was self-serve, but there was no chaos, just a steady, orderly flow. The counter stretched the length of the room, with each dish clearly labeled and priced, often just a penny or two per item. Bread, soup, and coffee were staples, but you might also find hearty stews, boiled potatoes, or even a slice of pie for those willing to splurge an extra penny. At the far end of the counter stood a cashier, often perched on a stool, ready to tally up the modest bill. Customers would grab a tray, slide it along the counter, and point to what they wanted. Behind the counter, kitchen staff worked tirelessly, replenishing the trays with freshly cooked meals. The efficiency was remarkable. Dishes were simple, made from inexpensive ingredients like beans, rice, and seasonal vegetables, but they were filling and nourishing. The aroma of simmering soups and freshly baked bread filled the air, creating a comforting atmosphere despite the hard times outside. One surprising detail was the role of the penny cafeteria lady, often a matronly figure who kept a watchful eye on the proceedings. She wasn't just there to manage the staff, she also acted as a kind of social glue, offering a friendly word or even slipping an extra roll to a regular who looked particularly down on their luck. Her presence added a touch of humanity to the otherwise utilitarian operation. The seating area was equally functional. Long communal tables filled the room, encouraging strangers to share a meal and perhaps a bit of conversation. There were no frills, just sturdy wooden benches and tables, scrubbed clean after each rush. The walls were often plain, though some cafeterias featured cheerful posters or signs reminding patrons to eat hearty, pay fairly. The entire process, from entry to exit, took just minutes, ensuring that even those on tight schedules could grab a meal. Penny cafeterias weren't just places to eat, they were lifelines for countless Americans. They embodied the spirit of resilience and community that defined the era. In a time when many struggled to make ends meet, these humble establishments offered not just sustenance, but a sense of dignity and connection. In the heart of the Great Depression, when pennies were precious and hunger was a constant companion, penny cafeterias offered more than just a meal, they offered dignity. These humble establishments served simple, hearty food designed to fill stomachs without emptying wallets. The menus were a reflection of the times, practical, affordable, and unpretentious. A typical meal might consist of a bowl of soup, a slice of bread, and a cup of coffee, all for just a few cents. But within these modest offerings lay a quiet genius, meals that were both nourishing and economical. The soups were often the star of the menu. Thick, hearty stews made with potatoes, beans, or barley stretched small amounts of meat and vegetables into meals that could feed dozens. One popular dish was depression soup, a simple concoction of onions, potatoes, and whatever else was on hand, simmered until it became a comforting, filling broth. Bread was always served alongside, often day-old loaves purchased cheaply from local bakeries and toasted to revive their flavor. For many, this simple combination was a lifeline. Coffee, too, played a surprising role. In penny cafeterias, it was often served weak, watered down to make it go further, but it was still a comforting ritual. For those who couldn't afford sugar or cream, black coffee became a symbol of resilience, a small luxury in an otherwise harsh world. And then there were the baked goods, pies and cakes made with inexpensive ingredients like apples, raisins, or molasses. These treats, though simple, brought a hint of sweetness to lives weighed down by hardship. One surprising detail about penny cafeterias is how resourceful they were with their ingredients. Leftover vegetables might be turned into hash, stale bread into bread pudding, and scraps of meat into savory pies. Nothing went to waste. This ingenuity not only kept costs low but also reflected the spirit of the era, a determination to make do with what was available. It's a reminder of how creativity thrives even in the toughest times. For many Americans, penny cafeterias were more than just places to eat, they were spaces of community. Strangers shared tables, swapping stories and offering encouragement. The food, though simple, was served with care, a small act of kindness in a world that often felt cruel. In these modest meals, there was a quiet dignity, a reminder that even in the hardest times, there was still warmth, still hope, still a way to carry on. Narration text asterisk. In the heart of the Great Depression, when breadlines stretched for blocks and families counted every penny, a humble innovation offered more than just a meal, it offered dignity. The penny cafeteria wasn't just a place to eat, it was a lifeline. Picture this, a bustling hall filled with the aroma of hearty soups and freshly baked bread, where a nickel could buy you a full plate. For parents who had once prided themselves on providing for their children, these cafeterias became a quiet refuge from shame. One of the most remarkable things about these cafeterias? They weren't charity. That was the genius of it. Meals were priced just low enough to be affordable, sometimes as little as a penny per item, but not free. That small act of payment preserved a sense of normalcy. A factory worker could still say, "I bought dinner tonight," even if it cost him just a few coins. And the food was good and simple but nourishing. Cream-chipped beef on toast, bean stews, and rice pudding were staples, often made from surplus ingredients donated by local farmers. Families would arrive together, children clutching their few cents tightly in their fists. Some cafeterias even had a rule: no one turned away, even if they couldn't pay. But most found a way. One touching detail? Many locations kept a quiet jar near the register, a discreet place where those who could afford a little extra could drop in spare change to cover someone else's meal. It was community care at its purest. And then there were the unexpected touches, the small joys in hard times. Some cafeterias hosted live piano music during the dinner hour, turning a simple meal into an event. Others handed out free cookies to children, a rare luxury when sugar was a precious commodity. For many kids, it was the only place they ever tasted a slice of pie. These cafeterias didn't just fill stomachs, they kept families afloat. In cities like Chicago and New York, they became neighborhood anchors, places where people exchanged job leads, shared news, and for just a little while, forgot their worries over a hot meal. By the time the Depression eased, many had vanished, replaced by diners and fast food chains. But for those who remembered, the penny cafeteria wasn't just a relic of hard times, it was proof that even in the darkest years, America found ways to take care of its own. Narration text asterisk. Picture this, it's 1933, and the line outside the cafeteria stretches around the block. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of fresh baked bread and simmering soup. But this isn't just a place to eat, it's a refuge. In the heart of the Depression, penny cafeterias became something far greater than cheap meal stops. They were community hubs, where strangers became neighbors over a shared bowl of stew. You'd walk in, tray in hand, and hear the clatter of dishes mixed with laughter. At one table, a laid-off factory worker swaps job leads with a young clerk. In the corner, an elderly widow shares her coffee with a college student who can't afford textbooks. These cafeterias had an unspoken rule: no one ate alone unless they wanted to. Waitresses, often called lunchroom mothers, kept an eye out for regulars who might be struggling, slipping them an extra slice of pie when times were especially tough. What's surprising? Many of these cafeterias had community bulletin boards where patrons posted everything from room rentals to free piano lessons. In Cleveland, one cafeteria even hosted weekly skill swaps. A mechanic might fix a broken watch in exchange for a tailor patching his jacket. It was barter economics at its most human. And then there were the celebrations. Birthdays, graduations, even small victories like landing a part-time job were marked with a shared cake or a chorus of off-key singing. In a time when radios and newspapers blared headlines of despair, these cafeterias became pockets of hope. The food was simple, maybe meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a nickel slice of apple pie, but the real nourishment was the camaraderie. By the late 1930s, as the economy slowly recovered, many of these cafeterias faded away. But their legacy lingered in the friendships forged over those scratched formica tables. For a generation that had lost so much, these spaces offered something priceless: the reminder that no one had to face hard times alone. Behind every steaming bowl of soup and every slice of bread served at the penny cafeterias were the tireless workers who kept these vital institutions running. These unsung heroes, many of them women, worked long hours in hot, cramped kitchens, often for little pay or even as volunteers. Their dedication ensured that countless families could eat during the darkest days of the Great Depression. The kitchens were a hive of activity, with pots clanging, steam rising, and the constant hum of conversation. It was a place where exhaustion mingled with pride, as workers knew their efforts were making a difference in the lives of their neighbors. One of the most remarkable aspects of these penny cafeterias was the sheer resourcefulness of the staff. With ingredients often scarce, they became masters of stretching every penny and every scrap of food. Leftover vegetables became hearty soups, stale bread was transformed into bread pudding, and even the bones from meat were boiled down for broth. One surprising fact? Many of these workers developed recipes that are still used today in community kitchens and food banks, a lasting legacy of their ingenuity during hard times. The volunteers were equally vital. Often, these were local women who saw the need in their communities and stepped up to help. They peeled potatoes, scrubbed pots, and served meals with a smile, even as their own families struggled. Some cafeterias even had children pitching in, carrying trays or washing dishes to earn a meal for themselves. It was a collective effort, a testament to the spirit of resilience and mutual aid that defined the era. Working conditions were far from easy. Kitchens were poorly ventilated, and the hours were grueling. Many workers stood on their feet for entire shifts, often in worn-out shoes. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a sense of camaraderie. Workers shared stories, jokes, and sometimes even tears as they labored side by side. For many, the cafeteria became a second home, a place where they found purpose and connection during a time of widespread despair. These workers and volunteers were the backbone of the penny cafeterias, embodying the spirit of community and perseverance that helped America endure the Great Depression. Their stories remind us that even in the toughest times, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Though their names may not be remembered, their impact lives on in the countless lives they touched, one bowl of soup at a time. As penny cafeterias spread across Depression-era America, they became a lifeline for millions, offering hot meals at prices even the poorest could afford. But these humble eateries were not without their challenges. Behind the steam-filled counters and clattering trays, penny cafeterias faced mounting criticism and financial pressures that threatened their very existence. Critics argued that these establishments, while well-intentioned, were merely a band-aid on the gaping wound of poverty. Some accused them of perpetuating dependency rather than fostering self-sufficiency. Others claimed the food, though affordable, was often bland and nutritionally lacking, a far cry from the wholesome meals families once enjoyed at home. Financial struggles were an ever-present shadow. Operating on razor-thin margins, penny cafeterias relied heavily on donations and volunteer labor. Many were run by charitable organizations or civic groups, but even their generosity had limits. The cost of ingredients, utilities, and rent steadily climbed, while the pennies collected from patrons barely covered expenses. In some cities, penny cafeterias were forced to raise prices to a nickel or even a dime, alienating the very people they aimed to serve. One surprising fact? In Chicago, a penny cafeteria once resorted to selling meal tickets for $1, which could be redeemed for 20 meals, a desperate attempt to stay afloat. The cafeterias also faced logistical hurdles. Crowds often overwhelmed the small spaces, leading to long lines and chaotic scenes. In New York City, one penny cafeteria reportedly served over 1,000 meals a day in a space no larger than a modest diner. Workers labored tirelessly, often without pay, to meet the demand. Yet, despite their efforts, shortages were common. Patrons sometimes left empty-handed, their hopes as thin as the soup they'd hoped to savor. Perhaps the most biting criticism came from those who saw penny cafeterias as a symbol of societal failure. Critics argued that a nation as wealthy as America should not need such institutions. Are we not capable of providing better for our own? One editorial lamented. Yet, for many, these cafeterias were not just a place to eat, they were a sanctuary, a reminder that even in the darkest times, community and compassion could still thrive. For every critic, there was a patron who remembered the warmth of a hot meal on a cold day, the kindness of a stranger, and the hope that better days lay ahead. And so, despite the odds, penny cafeterias endured, a testament to resilience in an era defined by struggle. The penny cafeterias of the Great Depression were more than just places to eat, they were lifelines, community hubs, and symbols of resilience in the face of hardship. These humble establishments, often tucked into urban storefronts or church basements, offered more than affordable meals, they offered dignity. A steaming plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas for just a few cents wasn't just sustenance, it was a reminder that even in the darkest times, no one had to face hunger alone. And while the Depression eventually ended, the legacy of these cafeterias lingered, shaping American food culture in ways we still feel today. One of the most surprising legacies of penny cafeterias is their influence on the modern fast food industry. The concept of quick, affordable meals served in a casual, self-service environment was revolutionary at the time. Chains like White Castle and Horn & Hardart's automats borrowed heavily from this model, offering efficiency and affordability to a generation that valued both. The automat, with its gleaming chrome and coin-operated windows, became a mid-century icon, but its roots trace back to those Depression-era cafeterias where efficiency and simplicity were necessities, not luxuries. Beyond the mechanics of dining, penny cafeterias also left a mark on American social life. They were places where people from all walks of life gathered: factory workers, office clerks, students, and even the occasional out-of-luck businessman. In these spaces, class distinctions blurred over shared meals. This spirit of inclusivity laid the groundwork for the diners and coffee shops that would become staples of American life in the 1950s and 60s. The diner counter, where strangers might strike up a conversation over a cup of coffee, owes a debt to the communal tables of penny cafeterias. Perhaps the most enduring legacy, though, is the way penny cafeterias reshaped our relationship with food. They introduced Americans to the idea that eating out didn't have to be a luxury reserved for special occasions. Instead, it could be an everyday convenience, accessible to people of all incomes. This shift paved the way for the explosion of fast food chains, family restaurants, and even the modern food truck phenomenon. In many ways, the penny cafeteria was the seed from which our contemporary food culture grew. As we look back on these Depression-era institutions, it's clear their impact extends far beyond their time. They were more than just places to eat, they were a testament to the ingenuity and compassion of a nation determined to survive. And though the last penny cafeteria may have closed its doors decades ago, their spirit lives on in every corner of American dining, reminding us that even in tough times, a simple meal can bring people together in extraordinary ways. In the heart of the Depression, penny cafeterias weren't just places to eat, they were lifelines, community hubs, and sometimes, the only warmth on a cold day. For many, these humble establishments carried stories of survival, dignity, and even joy. One such story comes from Clara Benson, who was just a teenager in 1933. She recalled walking miles to the cafeteria in Detroit, clutching her few pennies tightly in her hand. It wasn't just about the food, she said. It was about seeing faces you knew, sharing a word or two with strangers who felt like family. We were all in the same boat, trying to stay afloat. Clara's voice carries the weight of that era, but it also holds a surprising lightness. She remembered how the cafeteria staff would sometimes slip an extra slice of bread onto her tray if they noticed her lingering too long. They never made a fuss about it, she said. It was their way of looking out for us. These small acts of kindness became lifelines, stitching together a community that refused to give in to despair. Then there was George Miller, who worked in a Chicago factory during the Depression. He spoke of how the penny cafeteria became his refuge after grueling shifts. You'd walk in with the smell of grease and sweat clinging to you, but the cafeteria smelled like heaven: hot soup, fresh bread, coffee, he said. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. A bowl of stew for a penny, a cup of coffee for another. You could fill your belly and your soul for a nickel. George's story is a reminder that penny cafeterias weren't just about sustenance, they were about preserving dignity in a time when it was hard to come by. One surprising detail that emerges from these accounts is how penny cafeterias inadvertently became spaces of creativity. Mary Thompson, a seamstress from Philadelphia, recalled how she and her friends would trade recipes and tips for stretching meals, inspired by the simple dishes they ate at the cafeteria. "We'd take what we learned there and try to recreate it at home," she said. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about finding a way to make life feel a little richer. These voices from the past remind us that penny cafeterias were more than just places to eat. They were places where people found connection, hope, and even inspiration. Clara, George, and Mary's stories are threads in the larger tapestry of Depression-era America, woven together by resilience and shared humanity. Their words echo across the decades, reminding us of the power of community and the enduring strength of the human spirit. During the Great Depression, penny cafeterias weren't just a place to grab a cheap meal, they became a cultural symbol, woven into the fabric of American storytelling. These humble eateries, where a bowl of soup or a slice of bread could be had for just a penny, found their way into the movies, books, and advertisements of the era, reflecting the struggles and resilience of everyday Americans. In Hollywood, penny cafeterias often served as the backdrop for poignant scenes that captured the grit and determination of the times. One of the most memorable portrayals was in the 1933 film Wild Boys of the Road, where a group of young drifters, down on their luck, shuffles into a crowded cafeteria. The camera lingers on their faces as they scrape together pennies for a meager meal, a stark reminder of the era's hardships. These scenes resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom were living the same reality. It's said that some theaters even set up makeshift penny cafeterias in their lobbies after screenings, offering Depression-era patrons a taste of the on-screen experience. Literature, too, embraced the penny cafeteria as a symbol of survival. In John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, the Joad family's journey is punctuated by stops at communal kitchens and cafeterias, places where strangers shared not just food but stories of hope and despair. Steinbeck's vivid descriptions of these spaces, steamy kitchens, chipped bowls, and the clatter of spoons, painted a picture of communal endurance that struck a chord with readers. Advertisers, ever quick to adapt to the cultural climate, used penny cafeterias as a clever marketing tool. One surprising example comes from a 1932 campaign by the National Biscuit Company, which urged consumers to stretch your pennies by pairing their crackers with soup from local cafeterias. The ads featured smiling families gathered around cafeteria tables, a subtle nod to the idea that even in hard times, there was still warmth and togetherness to be found. Penny cafeterias also found their way into comic strips and radio dramas, often serving as the setting for moments of humor and humanity. In Little Orphan Annie, Annie herself was shown sharing a meal with her friends at a cafeteria, a scene that underscored the resourcefulness and camaraderie of the era. These depictions weren't just entertainment, they were a mirror, reflecting the realities of a nation grappling with economic collapse. Yet, they also offered a glimmer of hope, reminding Americans that even in the darkest times, there was still a place to gather, to share, and to endure. Penny cafeterias, once a necessity, became a cultural touchstone, immortalized in the stories that defined an era. As the echoes of clattering trays and the hum of conversation fade into history, the story of penny cafeterias leaves us with more than just nostalgia, it offers a testament to the quiet resilience of ordinary people in extraordinary times. These humble eateries weren't just places to eat, they were lifelines, woven into the fabric of communities struggling to survive. Imagine the weight of a single penny in 1932, a coin that could buy a bowl of soup, a slice of bread, or even a moment of dignity when so much had been lost. What's remarkable is how these cafeterias thrived not on charity, but on ingenuity. Take the case of Detroit's penny cafeterias, where local farmers traded surplus vegetables for meals, creating a barter system that fed thousands. Or the forgotten potato soup kitchens of Chicago, where cooks stretched every ingredient, peeling potato skins paper thin to make them go further. These weren't just meals, they were acts of defiance against despair. Yet, perhaps the most surprising legacy is how these cafeterias quietly shaped modern dining. The concept of self-service, now a staple of fast food chains, was popularized in penny cafeterias, where efficiency and affordability went hand in hand. Even the iconic cafeteria tray, with its compartments for different dishes, was refined during this era, a small innovation that endured for decades. Today, as we face our own challenges, rising food costs, economic uncertainty, the spirit of the penny cafeteria feels more relevant than ever. It reminds us that community isn't just about sharing resources, it's about sharing hope. In an age of drive-thrus and delivery apps, there's something deeply human about sitting down together over a simple, honest meal. The Depression taught Americans to find light in the darkest corners, to turn scarcity into solidarity. So the next time you pass an old storefront or a forgotten diner, pause for a moment. Listen closely, and you might just hear the faint clink of pennies on a counter, the murmur of voices long gone, but not forgotten. Their lesson endures, that even in the hardest times, we find ways to nourish not just our bodies, but our hearts. And that's a legacy worth remembering.